I'm at CanJam at Rocky Mountain Audio Fest 2017 here in Denver, and this is the day that Focal is going to be announcing officially their new Focal Clear headphone. This is a new model in their flagship line, and before we came here to Denver, we had a chance to sit down with Nicolas Debard from Focal at HeadFi HQ to talk about the new Focal Clear. Hi, I'm Jude from headfi.org. On this episode of HeadFi TV, I think you can see we have a special guest here at HeadFi HQ. We have Nicolas Debard from Focal. He's been here before, so I hope a lot of you remember him when he introduced the Focal Elear and Utopia. But now he's here from France to introduce a new headphone that I'm very excited about, and I'm going to let him tell you about it. Hey, Nicolas, thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for having me here. So basically, today we are unveiling Clear, which is our brand new headphones. That's new open back headphones sits right in between Elear and Utopia in terms of headphones philosophy. Basically, there our approach to the headphones design with Elear and Utopia was a bit different because we are coming from loudspeaker and speaker background. So there, the idea for us was to bring that kind of listening experience, I mean, to the very best pair of loudspeakers in the room through a pair of headphones. We follow that philosophy again on Clear with new stuff there. Basically two things here. The cushions and the drivers have been, let's say, based on a new design. The cushions we are using there on Clear are super open design cushions in order to listen to the piece of music in the room, but not through the pair of headphones, if you know what I mean. So these, without any music, you can put these on your head. You will not notice any difference with and without in the room, which is a key point in terms of what's going to be the philosophy of listening to music through the Clear headphones. The other innovation there is based on the driver side of Clear, because that's part of our core DNA at Focal. There we did a new thing on that driver. We are still using a formless voice coil, but that time that voice coil is made of 100% copper in order to optimize the control of the mobile equipment through the magnet.
And by the mobile equipment, you're referring to the motor assembly itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what I mean is obviously surround, the dome, and the voice coil.
Okay.
Right. Then here that gives reference headphones system based on that design. Here, the benefits of this new driver technology is basically based on the existing dome design we introduced in the markets through Utopia and Elear. It's an M-shaped dome. It's made of aluminum magnesium. And there, the benefits of the voice coil here on this assembly is that it gives you a lot of extension in the high frequencies. We are gaining 2 kHz in terms of breakup.
Now in a moment, Nicolas will be continuing to talk about driver breakup, but I first wanted to make sure you understood what driver breakup is. I can't think of a better way to do that than to show you a driver breaking up. So we're going to show you this animation. It's animation from finite element analysis of two different headphone drivers. Now, I don't have a raw headphone driver in my hotel room, but I do have this coffee lid. Pretend for a moment this is a headphone driver and you're looking directly at it. In the diagram that we're showing you, you're looking at a cross-section of that driver. So the driver turned on its side, and then you're only looking at half of it. You're looking at it from the center of the driver to the outer edge. The left side of that diagram is the center of the headphone diaphragm. The outer edge is represented by the right side. What you're looking at now is an actual headphone driver breaking up when playing a 20 kilohertz test signal. This is, by the way, a mylar diaphragm driver from a premium headphone. This is a more typical kind of headphone driver. To the right, you see the outer edge of the mylar diaphragm is connected directly to the driver frame. There's no real surround. It simply flexes at that juncture around its entire circumference. To the left, again, you're looking at the center of the diaphragm. The vertical element you see moving up and down is the voice coil. As you can see, the surface of the diaphragm is breaking up. It's moving in a wave-like pattern across its surface as opposed to pistonically. This leads to problems like distortion and phase issues. Again, this is a more typical type of driver found in headphones, and those waves make quite clear that this diaphragm is breaking up at 20 kilohertz. Now in contrast, let's look at the cross-section of a Focal headphone driver. In this illustration, it's the Focal Utopia's beryllium driver because we didn't specifically have FEA test results for the Elear or Clear. However, this is also being fed a 20 kHz test signal. This is below the breakup frequency of the Clear's driver, so I think you can expect that the Clear's driver would behave very similarly. Here you can see on the right side there's an actual separate surround around the entire diaphragm made of a very thin, very flexible material. This is similar to a dynamic loudspeaker driver, but obviously in miniature. You can see the voice coil is near the outer edge of the diaphragm. This contributes to greater control and better pistonic motion. What also helps a great deal, of course, is the material choice. In this case, the diaphragm is made of solid metal. It's much more rigid than Mylar, and so the diaphragm, as you can clearly see, is moving in a virtually perfect pistonic motion. This represents tremendous control of the driver's radiating surface. This lack of breakup is what Nicolas is talking about. So you say you have 2 kHz higher breakup frequency with this, the Focal Clear, versus the Elear.
Exactly. There, the main benefit of it is basically on two things. The first one is the ability of the driver to reproduce even the slightest details in the audio spectrum. That's the first point. And the other thing is the behavior of the dome itself compared to regular dome drivers technology like Mylar that are not rigid raw materials. The benefits of aluminum magnesium alloy is that you have a rigid dome. So even before the breakup on Mylar dome, you still have some waves on the dome. So you have, as a wave, top and let's say boost and dip. That is obviously a kind of in phase and out of phase response. So you have some cancellation at some point. Using rigid raw material like aluminum magnesium gives you the benefits of having a proper piston functioning up to very high frequencies.
The first time I heard the Clear was the day we sat down for that interview with Nicolas Debard, and I've since had time to listen to the headphone, to try it in different rigs, to compare it to its siblings, especially the Elear and the Utopia. Now, before we talk about my sound impressions, how I think about how the headphone sounds, I want to do a quick recap of where the Focal Clear sits in the flagship lineup of Focal with respect to its siblings. Again, the Clear sits between the Elear and Utopia and the flagship line. To me, I'd say it has a bit more in common with the Elear, though, because both use identical diaphragm material. We're talking about the aluminum magnesium solid metal diaphragm. Focal has, however, made a significant update to the voice coil. The Focal Clear uses a solid copper voice coil. The Elear uses copper-clad aluminum wire. Both are still formorless, so it's still very, very low mass, but there is increased rigidity with the new voice coil, and this is one of the things that contributes to the greater control we talked about earlier. Another key difference that comes with these changes is a lower nominal impedance. I don't remember if we mentioned this earlier, but the nominal impedance of the Focal Clear is 55 ohms. The Elear and Utopia are both around 80 ohms. According to Nicolas, this headphone, the Focal Clear, the new headphone, is easier to drive with portable devices, and so it's more versatile. So another thing that makes the Focal Clear more Utopia-like than Elear-like is the ear pads. They're more open, they're perforated like the Utopia ear pads. It's one of my favorite things in talking to Nicolas about headphone design. He constantly refers to the acoustic space of the ear cups as rooms. Remember, these are loudspeaker designers, and so for them, that ear space is like a room for which they control a lot of the parameters. For the Focal Clear, they decided to, again, go with something more open than the Elear, something approaching the Utopia. It gives better airiness and just a more open feel. While both the Clear and Utopia use perforated ear pads, the Utopias are covered in leather, the Clears are covered in what feels like Alcantara to me. Now let's get back to talking about how it sounds, how the Focal Clear sounds, especially relative to its siblings, the Focal Elear and the Focal Utopia. And this is where, again, they intended it to go between the two headphones, even sonically, and I think they've done that. So with the Focal Utopia, you have this almost ruthlessly revealing headphone. I will say it, I think of all the electrodynamic headphones currently available in the world, the Focal Utopia is probably the most resolving of them all. And then you have the Focal Elear, which is a more forgiving headphone than the Utopia, but still a very resolving headphone. It's just that when you put it in contrast to something like the Utopia, might it sound like it's a bit softer. Now let's get back to talking about the Focal Clear's sound quality. Obviously, this is probably the single most important thing we can talk about here. Let's talk about it relative to its siblings, the Elear and the Utopia. And just as Focal intended, it's pretty much right between the two, properly placed in the line. The Focal Utopia, still the flagship of this line, it is to me the single most resolving electrodynamic headphone you can currently buy, maybe ever made, to the point where at times it can be a bit ruthless. The treble presentation on the Utopia is beautiful, but it's also for my tastes, at the upper edge of where I want my treble to be. I'm a bit treble sensitive. So I would like to take that down a bit if I had my druthers with the Utopia. You know what I like about the Clear? It does that. It takes that treble down a bit relative to the rest of the spectrum. Now, in terms of bass, the Utopia has deep extension for an electrodynamic headphone, without a doubt. But as far as emphasis or lack of it, again, for my tastes, it's a bit light. So the treble is at the outer edge of where I want it to be. The bass is at the lower end of where I want it to be. So for me, overall, the Utopia is a bit leaner than I would like. Now, this does come down to preference, because Brian, who goes by Axel Chloris on the forums, he quite likes the Utopia just where it is. The Focal Elear, which is now the starter model for Focal in their flagship line, is definitely a more forgiving headphone. If you read the forums at all, you know that. It also has a more fun sound signature, a more boosted bass presence. I actually really like that a lot. That said, compared to the Utopia, I wouldn't mind that boosted bass with that level of control, that crazy control that the Utopia shows. The Focal Clear gets us a little bit more toward the Utopia that way. It still has some of the bass emphasis that the Elear has, definitely more impactful than the Utopias, but with a greater sense of control. And actually, I would say relative to the Elear, that's how I'd characterize the Clear. A greater sense of control, a greater sense of refinement. Even from the mid-band through the treble, I would describe it as smoother in its response. And I like that level of refinement, and I think that's exactly what Focal was going for. Something between the Elear and the Utopia. I get a lot of both that I want. Would I change anything about the Clear? Yeah, I'd probably give it more bass, because I tend to like quite a bit of bass emphasis, I think, relative to someone who thinks the Utopia is perfect as is. But I can always EQ that in. And that's what I do. Now, the funny thing is, again, it comes down to preference, because Axel Chloris, Brian, he would actually take the Clear and EQ the bass down just a bit, whereas I'd go up just a bit, and I do. So I think that's an interesting discussion to have. But I hope you're getting some idea now what the Focal Clear sounds like relative to its siblings. Because of CanJam and RMAF preparation, we weren't able to do a full suite of measurements of the Focal Clear. We just didn't have the time. We did do some preliminary measurements pretty much as we were running out the door. I hope these are helpful to you. We'll do a full set of measurements when we get back sometime after RMAF. I just want to conclude regarding sound quality, what I think about the Focal Clear. To me, it is my favorite of Focal's headphones. Not because it's the most resolving, that still goes to the Utopia, but because I'll take the trade-off for the tonal balance. The tonal balance for me is more in line with my preferences. And it still has more resolution to my ears than the Elear. So again, it's right there for me, and I'll save a lot of money in the process, taking the Clear over the Utopia. But again, this comes down to preferences. Brian prefers the Utopia. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how the impressions shake out, but I hope at least you now have a clearer idea, again, of where it sits with respect to its siblings. Sound quality isn't the only way the Focal Clear differentiates itself from its siblings. It also comes packaged very differently. Very cool, actually. It comes with a new carrying case and a much more reasonable choice in cables, but I'm going to let Nicolas tell you about that. So I want to talk about this case. Again, you're saying this is going to be available for people to purchase that already have Utopias and Elears. And it fits perfectly. So the Elear, Utopia, and the new Clear all have a very similar, but I mean, really, the dimensions are the same.
Yeah, dimensions are the same. Obviously, there we benefit from the very good job done by our mechanical design team on the headband, yoke, rotation principle. So we are using the very same, let's say, mechanical design, and the footprint inside the carrying case is 100% made on the footprint of Elear, Clear, and Utopia.
Yeah, you can tell. I mean, just look at it. The fit is fantastic. Now, I also like the compartments for being able to carry the cable. So I want to talk about the cables because I think some of the cables you've released previously, even with the other family of headphones, like with the Spirit, going back to the Spirit Classic, you guys like really long cables. And I know some headfires need it because some people will listen to their headphones across the room. But we're talking 4 meters, and for me, I like shorter cables. I was thrilled when I found out how you're packaging this in terms of the cable choices. They come with it.
Yeah, basically it's part of the feedback we get from the Edfi community. Shorter cables, Also saving weight, because it was part of the feedback we get in regards to the cable. So there you will have 3 cables provided within the packaging. The first one is a 1.2 meter cable with a mini jack. Second cable is a 3 meter cable with a 1/4 inch jack. And the last one is a 3 meter cable still with balanced design using XLR 4-pin.
Okay, so 4-pin XLR. And that first one that you mentioned is my favorite because I do like shorter cables. This is the 1.2 meter with the mini plug termination. And this is the one that I'm pretty much going to use exclusively, I think, because I usually sit next to my rig. So for anybody that's looking for a longer cable, I'm glad to know that it does still come with longer cables, 2 different longer cables, a 1/4 and a 4-inch XLR for balanced. Not 4-inch, 4-pin XLR for balanced, and then this shorter one. So I think that's great, and it comes with them. And then the case design is also cool because it has nice compartments to hold the cables, and I think you said it'll even hold the 3 meter cable. Not that I'm ever going to carry it, but if you're going to carry a 3 meter cable, that'll hold it.
Yeah, it fits.
Okay.
The 3 meter cable fits, yeah.
But with the 1.2, I'm able to get this in with an Astle and Kern Con in the case, and it fits actually very nicely. And you know, when you zip it up, you have this really nice handle. So yeah, I think having a case is a very nice option, especially when you made it more versatile to use with something like a portable device.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited about this headphone. Can't wait to spend more time with it. But in the first day of listening to it, everybody here has been very thrilled with it. Again, right down the middle. So that's the Focal Clear. It's launching today. And again, with this headphone, Focal sought to hit the mark between the Elear and the Utopia in their flagship lineup, and I think they hit that mark fantastically. Now, if you're at CanJam at RMAF with us, make sure to stop by Focal's exhibit to hear the new Focal Clear. If you're not, I'm sorry you couldn't join us, but make sure to join us on the forums at headfi.org to discuss it. Thanks for watching this episode of HeadFi TV. We'll see you next time.